Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are attempting to wrap our heads around something that is, quite frankly, massive.
It is. It really is. We usually pick a specific event, a battle, a single text.
Right, something manageable.
Whew.
But today we are looking at a span of history that covers, what, over 3,000 years?
At least. And it's a journey not just in time, but in space and in consciousness, really. It stretches from the grassy steppes of Central Asia all the way to the humid riverbanks of the Ganges.
And then eventually to a lecture hall in Chicago, of all places.
Exactly. We're trying to answer a huge question. How did a religion of, nomadic fire sacrifices evolve into this incredibly complex system of temple architecture, non-dualistic philosophy, and devotional singing?
It's a great question because I think for most people, myself included, when we hear Hinduism, we have a pretty specific image in our minds. You think of colorful temples, you think of idols of gods with multiple arms, you think of incense, reincarnation, karma.
Yeah.
It all feels like this one ancient monolithic thing that has just always been there.
That's the common perception, for sure. You even hear the term Sanatana Dharma, which, translates to the eternal religion.
Right, the eternal part implies it's unchanging.
It implies that the beliefs and practices we see today have existed, more or less, since the beginning of time. But when you actually open the books,
When you do the deep dive.
when you do the deep dive and you look at the archaeology, the linguistic studies, the actual philosophical treatises, you find something completely different.
You find that it hasn't always been there.
You find that if you were to hop in a time machine and go back to the earliest period of this history, say around 1500 BCE, and you looked for the things that define Hinduism for you today, temples, idol worship, the supremacy of Vishnu or Shiva, you wouldn't find them.
Wait, you wouldn't find them at all.
Barely, or at least not in any way you would recognize. You'd find a religion of nomadic tribes.
Wow.
You'd find people sitting around open fires out in the open, chanting to gods that are, frankly, largely forgotten or are minor figures today. You would not see a single stone temple.
That is actually really hard to picture. So the mission for us today is to figure out how we got from there to here. How does a religion of portable fire sacrifices turn into a religion of massive stone architecture and some of the most complex philosophy ever devised?
That's the story. It's a story of radical transformation layer by layer. And I think we can trace this evolution through maybe 4 or 5 specific lenses.
Okay, what are the layers?
We have the Vedic origins out on the steppes. Then we have what I'd call the scientific revolution of the Agamas, the texts that literally gave us the blueprints for temples.
The hardware, basically.
The hardware, exactly. Then comes the intellectual systematization by the philosopher Adi Shankara. Then you get the emotional revolution of Bhakti, the devotional movements, and finally the modern reinvention in the 19th century.
It really does sound like we're excavating an archaeological site, layer by layer.
That's the perfect metaphor for it.
Okay, well, let's grab our shovels then. Let's start at the very bottom layer, the Vedic foundation. Fire and sacrifice.
So, to understand the Vedas, you have to mentally transport yourself out of modern India entirely. We're going to the Eurasian steppe, roughly around 1500 to 1200 BCE.
So 3,500 years ago. And we're in, what, modern-day Russia or Kazakhstan?
That's the region, yeah. We're looking at cultures that archaeologists call Sintashta and Andronovo.
And who are these people? What's their life like?
They're the ancestors of the people who would later call themselves the Indo-Aryans. They are semi-nomadic pastoralists.
Cattle herders.
Cattle herders, exactly. And crucially, they are the people who really mastered the horse-drawn chariot. This is a game changer. It gives them incredible mobility and, frankly, military dominance.
So they're on the move, and they're heading south towards the Indian subcontinent. But the sources mentioned that they didn't just teleport there. There was a very important stop along the way, the BMAC.
Yes, the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, or BMAC for short.
Catchy name.
Not very, no. But it's in modern-day Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. And you should think of the BMAC as a kind of cultural holding pen or a mixing bowl. You have these rough chariot-riding nomadic Indo-Aryans coming down from the north, and they encounter this settled, fortified, urban civilization.
So it's not just a rest stop on the migration. It's a cultural exchange,
Yeah.
a collision.
It's a collision and a synthesis. The archaeological evidence and the linguistic evidence, too, suggests this is where the raw nature worship of the steppes got a little more sophisticated.
Urbanized, you said.
Urbanized, yeah. It's likely where they picked up some very specific beliefs that would become central to the Vedas. For example, the great god Indra and the ritual drink Soma. They seem to be BMAC influenced.
Okay, I want to dig into that. Indra and Soma. Because if you read the early text, these are the big names, right?
Huge, absolutely huge. If you read the Rig Veda, which is the oldest text we have, Indra is the undisputed king of the gods. He's a thunder god, a warrior, a hard-drinking warlord.
He sounds like a Viking god, almost.
Oh, yeah? Very similar archetype. He has about 250 hymns dedicated just to him in the Rig Veda. That's a quarter of the entire book. He's the one you pray to when you want to smash your enemies or, break open the clouds for rain.
And Soma. That's not a person, that's a drink.
Soma is fascinating. It was a plant, and scholars still argue ferociously about which specific plant it was that was pressed to create an intoxicating, hallucinogenic ritual drink. But the drink itself was considered a god.
So this substance was the deity.
Yes. The feeling of power, of invincibility you got from drinking it was the divine entering you. It was liquid courage, liquid divinity.
Okay, so paint the picture of a ritual back then. I'm an Indo-Aryan nomad. It's 1500 BCE. My tribe needs rain for our cattle. What do? I'm not going to a temple.
No, absolutely not. Remember, you're a nomad. You can't carry a stone cathedral on a chariot. Your entire religion has to be portable.
Makes sense.
So the central act of worship is the yajna, the fire sacrifice.
How does that work exactly?
You build a temporary altar out of mud bricks, according to very strict geometric measurements. You kindle a sacred fire. That fire is the god Agni. Agni is the key. He's the messenger.
The go-between.
The go-between. You pour offerings into the fire-clarified butter or ghee, grains, and of course, soma. The idea is that Agni, the fire, consumes these offerings and takes them up to the heavens in the form of smoke.
So you're literally feeding the gods.
You are feeding the gods.
Yeah.
They receive the food, they get strengthened, and in return, they grant you favors. It's very transactional.
Transactional. It sounds very different from modern ideas of devotion or faith.
It was explicitly transactional. A phrase often used to describe it is, Dehi me dadamite, give to me so that I may give to you. This wasn't about saving your soul or seeking enlightenment in the way we think of it now.
It was about results.
It was about worldly success.
Yeah.
I give the gods some expensive soma. The gods give me healthy cows, plentiful rain, and strong sons who can fight in my war band. It's a contract.
This is a very different vibe from the, renounce the world philosophy we usually associate with India. But I noticed something in the notes that really jumped out at me. In this early pantheon, where is Vishnu? And for that matter, where is Shiva?
And that is the first big shock for most people who look into this. In the Rig Veda, Shiva, as we know him, doesn't really exist. There's a fearsome god named Rudra who has some similar traits, but he's a minor scary figure.
And Vishnu.
Vishnu is there, he's mentioned, but he is, without a doubt, a minor deity.
How minor?
Well, remember, Indra got 250 hymns. Vishnu is mentioned maybe 100 times in the whole Rig Veda, and usually just as a companion or helper to Indra.
He's the sidekick, like Robin to Indra's Batman.
That's a perfect analogy, actually. Yes.
Oh.
He helps Indra defeat the great serpent Vritra, who's holding back the waters. He's a loyal ally. But, and this is a huge but, there is one specific myth mentioned about him in the Rig Veda that plants the seed for his future dominance.
Okay, what's that?
It's the myth of the Trivikrama, the 3 strides.
I think I've heard this one. I will measure the earth in 3 paces.
That's the one. The myth, in its earliest form, says that Vishnu measured out the entire universe, the earth, the atmosphere, and the highest heaven in just 3 giant steps.
Why was that one specific story so important for his evolution later on?
Because it established him uniquely as the axis mundi,
The world pillar.
the connecting link between all the worlds. Even though he was a minor figure back then, this unique ability to span all realms, to pervade all existence, allowed later theologians to reimagine him as the supreme being.
So that myth was like a philosophical seed that just needed a few centuries of watering.
A brilliant way to put it. The name Vishnu itself likely means the pervader. The myth gave him the, let's call it the architectural potential to become the foundation of the cosmos later on. But at this stage, he's just a helpful friend of the real star, Indra.
So we have this fire-based, mobile, transactional religion, but then these tribes start moving out of the Punjab and into the Gangetic Plain. They're settling down, things must start to change.
They change dramatically. We enter what's called the later Vedic or Brahmanical period, roughly 1100 to 500 BCE.
So they're not nomads anymore.
For the most part, no. They're becoming agriculturalists. Small kingdoms are forming, like Kuru and Panchala. Society is becoming more complex, more stratified, and as society changes, the religion has to shift with it.
And this is where the philosophy starts to get really heady, right? This is the age of the Upanishads.
Exactly. The focus starts to move from the external ritual, the act of pouring ghee into a fire, to internal speculation. The priests, the Brahmins, start asking, wait, what is the fire really? What is the nature of the person making the offering? What is the connection between the two?
They're internalizing the sacrifice.
Perfectly put. They internalize the ritual. The physical heat of the fire becomes tapas, the inner heat generated by meditation and austerity. The sacrifice moves from the altar into the mind.
But even here, the sources are clear that we haven't quite reached what we call classic Hinduism yet. Some key pieces are still missing.
Correct. The early Upanishads are speculating about the self, the Atman, and ultimate reality, Brahman. But the full-blown engine of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth driven by karma, that's still developing.
So no reincarnation yet.
The ideas are there in embryonic form, but it really crystallizes as a central doctrine during the second urbanization a bit later, around 500 BCE, which is also when Buddhism and Jainism arise. But the seed is planted here. The fire has moved from the external altar to the internal mind.
Okay, so that's our foundational layer, the fire. But now I want to talk about the hardware. Because today, if you go to India, the defining feature of the landscape is the temple. Massive, permanent stone structures. How on earth did we make the leap from temporary brick altars to, granite skyscrapers for the gods?
That brings us to our second layer and to a body of text that gets way less popular attention than the Vedas, but is, in many ways, just as important for the religion as it's practiced today. These are the agamas.
The agamas, I have to admit, I feel like most people, even those interested in this stuff, haven't even heard that word. What are they?
So, if the Vedas are considered sruti, which means that which is heard, eternal revelation, the agamas are considered smriti, that which is remembered. They are essentially practical manuals.
How-to guides?
The ultimate how-to guides of Hinduism. And they represent a massive theological shift. The Vedic religion was largely about abstract forces and communicating via fire. The agamas are explicitly theistic. They are about worshiping a specific supreme Lord Shiva, Vishnu, or the goddess in a specific form.
And to worship a specific form, you need a house for it.
You need a home for it, exactly.
Right.
You need a temple.
Yeah.
But the Kamika Agama, which is a key Saiva or Shaivite text that we have on our source stack, describes the temple as something much more than just a house.
Okay.
It describes the temple as a machine.
A machine. In what sense? A machine for what?
It's a focusing device, a spiritual reactor, if you will. The text lays out the Shilpa Shastra, the science of sculpture, and the Vastu Shastra, the science of architecture. The entire goal is to design a structure that can capture the diffuse cosmic power of the deity and concentrate it, focus it into the idol, the murti, at the heart of the temple.
So it's like a giant spiritual lens.
That's a great way to think of it. And because it's a precision machine, the engineering has to be absolutely perfect. You can't just build it anywhere on any old plot of land.
You can't just hire a contractor.
No. The agamas prescribe these incredibly rigorous tests for the soil. You have to dig a pit, check the consistency, the color, even the smell and the taste of the earth.
Wait, they tasted the dirt?
They tasted the dirt. The earth had to have the right qualities, the right energy to properly ground the deity and hold the spiritual charge.
That's incredible.
And the measurements of the temple are not random or just for aesthetic purposes. They're based on a sacred grid, a mandala, that connects the microcosm, which is the human body, with the macrocosm, the universe. The temple is literally a stone model of the cosmos and also a model of your own inner spiritual body.
So it's not just decoration, it's circuitry. The whole building is a kind of sacred circuit board.
Precisely. And we can actually trace the evolution of this form. In the Vedic period, as we said, they had the Solva Sutras.
Right, the rules for the fire altars.
Yes, the geometry for building the fire altars. You needed precise brick counts and layouts. Over centuries, as they settled, those temporary altars evolved into more permanent yagasalas, or sacrificial halls made of wood and bamboo. Still not stone, but a step towards permanence.
And then stone.
And then, during the Gupta dynasty, around the 4th, 5th century CE, they cracked the code. They figured out how to translate this complex sacred geometry into stone. And once they moved to stone, the scale just exploded.
I can imagine.
We went from build a fire, say a prayer, dismantle it, to build a stone mountain that will stand for 1,000 years. It was a fundamental transition to permanence. The divine was no longer just a visitor you invited with fire. The divine was now a permanent resident in the community.
So we have the rituals from the Vedas, and we have the temples from the agamas, we have the software and the hardware. But what about the operating system? That brings us to one of the biggest and maybe most intimidating names in all of Indian philosophy. Section 3, Adi Shankara.
The rock star philosopher.
He lived around the 8th century CE, right?
Yeah.
And he's the great champion of Advaita Vedanta. Now, I want to slow down here because this can get complicated and very abstract very quickly. In simple terms, what exactly is Advaita?
Advaita literally means non-dualism, or, more simply, not two.
Not two.
The core idea is incredibly radical. Shankara looked at all the distinctions we make, me versus you, the self versus the world, the soul versus God, and argued that on the ultimate level, all these distinctions are false.
So everything is one.
Everything is one. The individual self, what he calls the Atman, and the ultimate universal reality, Brahman, are not just connected, they are identical. They're the same thing.
So the famous saying, I am the universe.
That's it. Tattvamasi, that thou art. You are that. He argued that the feeling of separation we all experience, our sense of being an individual ego locked in a body, is all an illusion. The technical term is Maya.
Okay, illusion is a word that gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
What did he actually mean by Maya? Is he saying this table isn't real? That my pain isn't real?
Not exactly. A better analogy, one that Shankara uses himself, is the famous example of the rope and the snake.
Right.
Imagine you're walking down a dusty path at twilight. It's getting dark. You see a coiled shape on the ground. Instantly, you recoil in fear, thinking it's a venomous snake. Your heart races. You break into a cold sweat. The fear is 100% real. The physiological reaction is real.
But it's not a snake.
Exactly. A friend comes along, shines a light on it, and you see it's just a coiled piece of rope. The snake never actually existed, but your experience of it did. Shankara says our experience of the world, with all its pain, its pleasure, its ego, its separation, is the snake. It feels absolutely real to us.
But it's a misperception of what's actually there.
It's a misperception of the rope, which is Brahman, the one undivided reality. The goal of philosophy, of jnana or knowledge, isn't to fight the snake or fix it. It's to shine the light and realize it was never there to begin with. We don't become Brahman. We realize we were Brahman all along.
That is heavy. It implies that this entire world we live in, everything we strive for, doesn't really matter in the ultimate sense.
It implies that the world has a relative or a conventional reality, but not an absolute one. And this brings us to a really interesting controversy from his own time. The sources mention that his critics had a nickname for him. They called him a crypto-Buddhist.
Prachanabodha, a secret Buddhist. Why? What was so Buddhist about his philosophy?
You have to remember the context. By the 8th century, Buddhism had been the dominant intellectual force in India for 1,000 years. And the Mahayana Buddhists, particularly the philosopher Nagarjuna, had developed these incredibly sophisticated ideas about emptiness and the two truths, a conventional truth and an ultimate truth.
Okay.
So when Shankara comes along talking about Maya, this illusory world, and his concept of a formless, attributeless ultimate reality, a nirguna Brahman, well, to his opponents, it sounded suspiciously similar to the Buddhist concept of the void, or emptiness.
So they thought he was just repackaging Buddhist philosophy in a Vedic wrapper?
Yeah.
Stealing their ideas?
That was the accusation, that he was smuggling Buddhist logic into the heart of Hindu orthodoxy. And to be fair, there's some truth to it. He definitely took the rigorous dialectical methods that the Buddhists had perfected and used them to, ironically, defeat them in debate. He anchored those high-level metaphysical arguments back in the authority of the Upanishads.
But here's the plot twist that I found most fascinating in the reading. We think of Shankara today as this colossus, this figure who single-handedly defined Hinduism. But the sources suggest the historical Shankara might not have been that big of a deal in his own lifetime.
This is the crucial difference between history and hagiography, or sacred biography. The historical Shankara was undoubtedly a brilliant debater and the author of some profound philosophical commentaries. But the legend of Shankara, the great organizer, the guy who marched to the four corners of India, defeated all his opponents, and established 4 massive monasteries, that narrative seems to have been constructed, or at least heavily amplified, centuries after his death.
Specifically, the source points to the Vijayanagara Empire in the 14th century. That's, 600 years after he died?
It's a huge gap. You have to think about the 14th century. The Vijayanagara Empire, based in the south of India, is the last major Hindu empire standing. They are facing a massive existential threat from the Islamic sultanates of the north.
So they needed more than just armies.
They needed a unifying ideology. They needed a symbol of a cohesive, unified Hindu orthodoxy to stand against the clear, uncompromising monotheism of Islam. They needed an intellectual figurehead.
They needed their own version of a pope or a central authority.
In a way, yes. And a key figure named Vidyaranya, who was a powerful minister and the head of the Sringeri monastery, seems to have been instrumental in elevating Shankara into that role. They rediscovered and promoted Shankara as the Jagat Guru, the world teacher.
And the sources mention the Shanmata system in this context. What was that?
The legend that they promoted was that Shankara had created the Shanmata, or sixth system, form of worship. The idea was to unify all the squabbling Hindu sects, the people who worship Shiva, those who worship Vishnu, the goddess worshiper, and so on.
By saying they're all okay.
By arguing that all these different deities are ultimately just different manifestations of the one formless Brahman that Shankara talked about. So you can worship your chosen god, but you have to accept that at the highest level, it's all one.
So in a way, the Shankara we know today, the great unifier of Hinduism, is a 14th century political and cultural necessity, projected back onto an 8th century philosopher.
That's a cynical way to put it, but yes, it's probably a more historically accurate way to look at it. The Vijayanagara Empire needed a figure who could provide a philosophical basis for saying all our diverse gods and practices are actually one, in order to create a united cultural front. Shankara's Advaita fit the bill perfectly.
Okay, so Shankara gives us this incredibly high-tower, abstract intellectualism. The world is a rope, not a snake. Atman is Brahman. But let's be honest, for the average person, for the farmer or the shopkeeper, formless reality is a really tough sell. It's cold, it's impersonal. I want something to love, something to have a relationship with.
And that is exactly the reaction, the human need that fueled our next great layer of the story, the devotional revolution, the bhakti movement.
This feels like a classic pendulum swing from the head to the heart.
Completely. If Shankara's path was Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, bhakti was the path of love and devotion. It emphasized prapati, total emotional surrender to a personal, God-over-dry intellectual realization.
And this really takes off with the rise of Vaishnavism, the worship of Vishnu.
It does. Our source on the history of Vaishnavism really highlights the importance of the Alvars.
The Alvars.
Who were they? They were a group of poet saints in South India from roughly the 6th to the 9th centuries, and they were not sitting in monasteries writing dense Sanskrit commentaries. They were wandering from temple to temple, village to village, singing these incredibly passionate, emotional, ecstatic songs of love for Vishnu.
And crucially, they were singing in Tamil, right? Not in Sanskrit.
That is the key. Sanskrit was the language of the elite, the language of the Brahmin priests. Tamil was the language of the people. This was a democratization of religion. It took spirituality out of the hands of the scholars and gave it to everyone.
So you didn't need to know the Vedas. You didn't need to understand complex philosophy.
You just needed a heart full of love for God. That was the only qualification.
But this populist emotional movement eventually needed its own philosophy to counter the intellectual dominance of Shankara, didn't it? You can't just sing forever. Eventually a scholar comes along and asks, but wait, is the world real or not?
Right. The heart needs the head to defend it. And that gives us the next great philosopher, Ramanuja, in the 11th century. He looked at Shankara's world as an illusion idea and basically said, no, that's just wrong. It devalues God's creation and it makes devotion meaningless.
He called his system Vishishta Advaita, which means qualified non-dualism. Can you break that down for us, maybe with an analogy?
Sure. Let's go back to the pomegranate analogy. Shankara, the pure non-dualist, would say that ultimately only the single unified reality of pomegranateness is real. A pure dualist would say the seeds and the skin are totally separate things. Ramanuja comes along and says, look, the pomegranate is one single fruit. That's the non-dual part, the Advaita. But within that one fruit, it has distinct real parts. The seeds, the juice, the skin, they are different, but inseparable from the whole.
So the diversity is real. The parts are real.
Yes. For Ramanuja, the diversity is real and beautiful. He argued that the world and all the individual souls within it are the body of God. Just as your soul has a body, the entire universe is the body of Vishnu. So the world isn't an illusion to be discarded. It's the glorious manifestation of God to be cherished and celebrated.
That feels much more life-affirming. It gives meaning back to the world.
It completely validates worship. If the idol in the temple is a part of God's body, then worshiping it makes perfect sense. If the world is God's body, then living a good life in the world has ultimate meaning. He also did something brilliant. He integrated the Tamil hymns of the Alvars into the formal, Sanskrit-based temple liturgy, bridging the gap between folk devotion and elite philosophy.
And then came Madhva, a couple centuries later, who went even further in the other direction.
Madhva went all the way. He was the great champion of Dvaita, or pure dualism. He sat at the complete opposite end of the philosophical table from Shankara. He said, I am not God. God is God. I am a soul. The world is the world. These three things are eternally and irreducibly separate.
He wanted to maintain that relationship, because you can't love someone if you are that someone.
Precisely. For Madhva, the entire joy of bhakti requires separation. The devotee wants to taste the sweetness of sugar, not become the sugar. The relationship between lover and beloved is the highest bliss, and for that, you need two.
And alongside this philosophical shift, the gods themselves were changing. We talked about how Vishnu was a pretty minor figure in the Vedas. By this time, he's the supreme lord for millions, but he's also different. He's more human.
This is the power of the avatar doctrine, the idea of divine incarnation. The sources talk about how texts like the Mahabharata, the Harivamsa, and later the Puranas fleshed out the lives of Krishna and Rama.
How does Krishna change, for example?
Well, in the Vedas, you don't hear about God as a mischievous baby who steals butter. You don't hear about God as a young man flirting with the milkmaids in the forest. The Harivamsa gives us this rich, detailed biography of Krishna's childhood and youth. It makes him relatable. He becomes a child you can feel parental love for, a friend you can joke with, a lover you can long for.
It makes God approachable.
Infinitely. And the same thing happens with Rama. He evolves from being a great human hero, the perfect son and king in the original Ramayana, into being explicitly identified as a full-blown avatar of Vishnu by the 3rd or 4th century CE. This whole concept of avatar of descent solves the problem of the distant, abstract God. The Vedic gods were way up there, and we sent smoke signals. In Bhakti Vaishnavism, God comes down to live in the neighborhood.
And the goal of religion changes, too. With Shankara, the goal was to lose your individuality and merge into the formless Brahman. What's the goal here?
The goal shifts dramatically. It's no longer about disappearing into the void. The goal becomes reaching Vaikuntha, Vishnu's celestial heaven, a real place of eternal light and bliss.
And what do you do there?
You don't merge. You retain your individual identity forever, and you spend eternity in a blissful, loving service relationship with the Lord. It's a social salvation, not a solitary merger.
So we've laid down these incredible foundations: the Vedic fire, the Agamic temples, Shankara's philosophy of mind, and the Bhakti revolution of the heart. But there is one more massive and maybe controversial layer to excavate, the one that brings us into the modern world. Section 5, the 19th century Hindu Renaissance.
This is the period that in many ways created the version of Hinduism that is taught in world religion textbooks today.
Okay, so set the scene. It's the 19th century, the 1800s. The British are in power across India. This isn't just a political or military occupation, it's an intellectual one too.
It was a pressure cooker. You had British administrators, thinkers like the utilitarians, and of course, Christian missionaries. And they looked at popular everyday Hinduism, the thousands of idols, the complex caste system, the local rituals, and they were, to be blunt, horrified.
They saw it as primitive.
They used words like idolatry, superstition, priestcraft, and barbarism. And this wasn't just, name-calling. This critique was coming from the ruling power. It was embedded in the new legal system, in the education system they were setting up.
It must have created a profound crisis of confidence among the Indian elite.
A massive one. The new English-educated Indian intellectuals had to ask themselves, are the British right? Is our religion actually broken? Is it just a messy pile of incoherent rituals?
And the response to that crisis was the Hindu Renaissance.
Yes. It was a movement of deep self-reflection, of reform. But, and this is a critical point from the sources, it was also a movement of sanitization and rebranding.
Sanitization, what do you mean?
They wanted to formulate and present a version of Hinduism that could stand toe-to-toe with the perceived monotheistic and rational superiority of Protestant Christianity and Western science. So they started digging back through those layers we've been discussing, looking for the pure, original core of their religion.
Who are the key figures in this project?
It really kicks off with a man named Raja Rammohan Roy. He founded an organization called the Brahmo Samaj in Bengal. He was a profound rationalist. He looked at popular practices like sati widow immolation and the worship of multiple idols, and he said, this isn't the real religion. These are later medieval corruptions.
So he went back to the texts to find the pure version.
He went back to the Upanishads. He argued that true ancient Hinduism was fundamentally monotheistic, philosophical, and rational. He tried to strip away all the mythology of the Puranas to find a clean, ethical, universal core that a modern, educated person could accept.
Then you have someone like Swami Dayananda Saraswati.
Right, his slogan was even more direct, back to the Vedas. He was even more radical than Roy. He rejected the Puranas entirely. He said the agamas and temple worship were false. He rejected caste discrimination based on birth. He tried to reframe the Vedas as this ancient, perfect text that contained the seeds of all modern science.
But the figure who really packaged this new vision of Hinduism for a global audience was Swami Vivekananda.
Vivekananda is the bridge. He was the disciple of a very traditional ecstatic mystic named Ramakrishna, but Vivekananda himself was brilliant, articulate, and Western educated. He understood the Western mind, its anxieties, and its spiritual longings.
And his speech at the Parliament of World's Religions in Chicago in 1893 is the stuff of legend.
It is. It was a sensation. But we need to look at what he was teaching there. He presented what scholars now call Neo-Vedanta.
Neo-Vedanta, so a new Vedanta.
It's a modern synthesis.
Yeah.
He takes the high philosophy of Shankara's non-dualism, the idea that we are all one, that the divine is within us, but he strips away the traditional world-denying monastic withdrawal that came with it.
How so?
He added a strong activist dose of social service. He brilliantly argued that because we are all one, because God is in every being, then serving a poor person, healing a sick person, educating a child, that is the highest form of worship. Serving humanity is serving God.
That sounds very modern, very progressive.
It was revolutionary. And he preached a radical universalism. All religions, he said, are but different paths leading to the same truth. This was a brilliant rhetorical move. It allowed modern Hinduism to reposition itself. It could now say, we aren't a backward polytheistic faith. In fact, our religion is the most advanced and tolerant because it includes and honors everyone else's path.
But you used that word sanitization earlier. What got left out of this new global friendly package?
A lot of the messy stuff. The local village level traditions, the animal sacrifices that were still common in goddess worship, the complex and often erotic mysticism of the tantric traditions, the rigid, uncomfortable realities of caste orthodoxy. The Renaissance reformers tended to push all of that to the margins, calling it superstition. They created a version of Hinduism that was philosophical, dignified, unified, and palatable to a Western audience.
It's almost as if Vivekananda and the others completed the project that Vidyaranya and Vijayanagar empires started centuries earlier. They created a unified front, but this time for the colonial gaze.
That is a brilliant connection to make, yes. Both were powerful intellectual responses to a perceived external threat. Vijayanagara responded to the Islamic gaze. The Renaissance responded to the colonial gaze. And both times, the strategy was to synthesize the staggering diversity of the tradition into a single, powerful, unified identity.
Wow. So we have traveled from the steppe nomads sacrificing horses in the open air, to the temple architects tasting soil, to the philosophers arguing about ropes and snakes in monasteries, to the poets singing of divine love in the streets, and finally to the Western educated reformers building a unified global faith on a stage in Chicago.
It is quite a journey, to put it mildly.
So if we have to synthesize all of this, if we have to try and wrap our heads around what Hinduism actually is after this entire deep dive, what is the big takeaway?
I think the key takeaway is that Hinduism is not a museum piece. It's not a static fossil locked in amber. It is a river.
A river that changes its course over time.
A river that not only changes course, but picks up silt and minerals from every single bank it touches along the way. It picked up Indra and the chariot from the steppes. It picked up temple technology from the agamas. It picked up rigorous dialectics from its long argument with the Buddhists. It picked up raw emotionality from the Tom Alvers. It picked up ideas about nationalism, social organization, and PR from its encounter with the West.
And it kept all of it. It didn't throw the old stuff away.
That's the genius and the complexity of it. It rarely discards anything completely. It just integrates it, reinterprets it, adds a new layer on top. You can still today find a Vedic fire ritual being performed inside an agamic-style temple by a priest who quotes Shankara's philosophy while a devotee in the corner sings a bhakti song. All of it managed by a temple trust board set up according to laws passed during the Renaissance. It's all there. It's all happening at once.
That's a profound image. An archaeology where all the layers are somehow still alive.
Yeah.
It really challenges the idea that any religion is this static thing that just drops from the sky fully formed.
Exactly. It forces you to see religion not as an artifact, but as an ongoing human project. a living, breathing, evolving response to history, to politics, and to the deepest and most enduring human needs.
And I think that brings us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, the listener.
Right. When you use the word Hinduism today, or hear it used, just take a moment and realize that you're not referring to a single monolithic thing. You are referring to this massive, multi-layered archaeological site of ideas we've just walked through.
And the idea that this site is unified.
That unification wasn't ancient or inevitable. It was actively constructed. It was built by brilliant strategic figures like Vidyaranya in the 14th century and Vivekananda in the 19th, each for their own historical reasons. And that forces us to ask the final question. What will the next layer look like? How is this ancient tradition being reinvented right now in the 21st century in response to globalization, technology, and new political realities?
A living archaeology. I love that. It makes you look at every temple, every ritual, every text just a little differently. Thank you so much. This has been an incredible journey.
It was my pleasure. It's a vast topic, but a fascinating one.
And thank you all for listening. Keep asking the big questions, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.